I'm talking about Africa, folk, there's just not a whole lot of good I can think to say about Africa. Much too often an African man living in the countryside will tell his wife and children, I'm going to the city, I'm going to the big city and find a job, and as soon as I find a job, I'll come and send for you. He goes to the big city, and his wife and children never hear from him again. AIDS is a huge problem. The AIDS crisis has been somewhat alleviated by the use of the drugs that we use here to curb it and extend life. For a long time, Africa's going to afford it, but the United States began to give aid to Africa. I want to say this about the AIDS crisis in Africa. A lot of your men in your 50s and 60s don't seem to catch it. Then who does? Men and women under 50 and 60, younger people. My oldest daughter was supporting a young girl in Africa who was born exactly 10 years after she was, and this girl, my oldest daughter was born in 1990, and this girl in Africa was born in 2000 on the same date, exactly 10 years later. By 2005, it was found out this girl already had AIDS, if she hadn't been born with it. I do not know the outcome. I think my daughter stopped supporting her when she had to go to college, went to college and had no money. But she was sending money to support this girl for a while. Unlike in the United States, the AIDS crisis there hits women equally hard as it does men. Here, AIDS was, back when it was a crisis, it seemed to be mostly a male crisis, but there in Africa, it hit both genders pretty hard. All right. Again, your book doesn't have a whole lot to say about Africa. What's the future of Africa? That the gap between Africa and the rest of the world is getting wider all the time, and that gap may be hard to bridge. That's the way your book puts it. All right. With that, I won't have more to say, just what's on the board. And we'll move on to the Middle East. All right. The one thing that keeps the Middle East united, as much as it is their hatred for the nation of Israel. They all agree that Israel must go.
Wait, who keeps who united?
The Middle East. We're going to talk about the Middle East. I'm talking about the countries of Egypt, Syria, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Tunisia, Arabia, Lebanon. You know what part of the world I'm talking about, I hope. Yeah, you know, they're all these nations I named are Muslim countries.
You're against who?
Huh?
Against Iran.
They're all against the existence of Israel. But other than that, you might think, well, Israel, with no more than about 3 million people, on a sea of people that have about 50 million in population, you might think Israel doesn't have a chance to exist. But there's one reason why, well, two reasons why Israel continues to exist. Reason number one is the Arab people spend a lot of their time fighting among themselves. Now, even as I speak, Syria is fighting hard against Syria. Egypt is fighting really hard against Egypt. Libya is fighting hard against Libya. Tunisia is fighting against Tunisia. You kind of catch my drift. They're fighting themselves, and they spend so much time fighting themselves. Now, folk, Islam might have conquered the whole world, but there's a couple of reasons why they didn't. Reason number one is they started fighting among themselves. And reason number two, but the main reason, they started fighting. Reason number two is they have not fought so well outside of a desert environment. And then, of course, when there became a technological explosion in Europe, the technology left the Arabs largely behind. Now, in my other class, I have a young woman from Syria, and she is she's an ace student. I'm not going to call her name, But she's so upset because back at home, the rockets are hitting really close to where her relatives live, and she's thinking she ought to go back to Syria. I said, hey, you're probably safer here in the United States. Stay here. There's no, and I said, there's nothing you can do if you go back. And in the meantime, here in America, we haven't heard anything about Syria in a long time. We're more concerned about a missing Southeast Asian jetliner, more concerned about Boris Yeltsin. And, you know, we had a mudslide that killed a lot of people. But we just don't talk about Syria anymore. Now, it'll probably come back in the news. But they spend a lot of their time fighting each other. Now here's something I want to say about the issue of Palestine. I mean, I have several. I don't know the religious beliefs of any one of you, and I'm not going to ask. If you want to tell me, that's fine. But I have several Muslim students in my other class. And one of them wrote a paper where he insisted that the land that Israel is sitting on belongs to the Palestinians, period. It belongs to Palestinians. Well, I did some thinking about this. I mean, you know, some students write things that get me to thinking. And here's the mindset. When we fought the Japanese, once we had thoroughly clobbered them, they quit fighting. When we fought the Germans, it took some doing, but once we clobbered them, they quit fighting. When the North fought the South in the Civil War, when the South saw they were licked, they bowed the inevitable, they freed all their slaves, and basically they quit fighting. But now we're dealing with a bunch of people in the Middle East who are not going to quit fighting. What's it going to take? In the case of the Japanese, all it took was the emperor said, I'm going to surrender, and all the Japanese armies and navies and air force stopped fighting. There's no one man who can do that in the Muslim world. What's it going to take to get them to stop fighting? Folks, I want to remind you of something. The fighting has been going on for 1,400 years. And there's no end in sight that I can see. 1,400 years. Now, hey, I don't wish them ill, but they're the type of people who will just keep coming at you and keep coming at you, and unlike other persons, there's no stopping. No stopping them coming at you. When they can't win, they'll start terrorizing you, planting suicide bombs and destroying you that way. It's kind of a depressing picture. And then you want to ask them when they say that Israel had no right to conquer, and I have to, did your people ever conquer any other lands? Every human being alive today is living on land that was taken from somebody else. As an American, my ancestors took this land from the Indians. Oh, am I proud of that? Not really. It just happened. We all are living on land. Everybody that was taken from other people. That includes even the Middle Eastern peoples are living on land that their ancestors took from other people. No exceptions. I'm not saying it's right. It's the way life is. Anyway, I might have said this before, but the British in 1917 promised that the Jews would have a homeland in Palestine. The Muslims objected so hard that the British didn't do it. They reneged on their promise. Then came World War II and the Holocaust. At that point, the Jews reminded me, the British owned the land at the time. By the way, something else I want to tell you, folks. The Palestinians have never owned the land of the Palestine. Back up a bit, it was owned by the British between the wars. Before the British had it, the Ottoman Empire had it. Before the Ottoman Empire had it, the Byzantine Empire had it. Well, the Safavids had it. When did the Palestinians have it? The answer is never. They've never had it. Go back far enough, you get the Romans had it. Go back even before then, the Jews had it. When did it belong to the Palestinians? Never. They insist that the land belongs to them. Anyway, when Great Britain did not want to offend the Jews, so Great Britain turned the issue over to the United Nations. the United Nations vote, and folk, there has never been in the history of mankind a nation that was created more legally. The United Nations vote to give the Jews the land they were already living on. The United States can't claim that we had a UN mandate to set up our country. The British can't claim that. The Russians can't claim that. But the Jews, the Israelis, can claim that the world body voted. And of all the people who voted to give them the land was, believe it or not, Russia. Stalin, for a while, favored partition. Stalin voted for it. The Chinese voted for it. And all your Latin American countries voted for it. All your North and South American countries voted for it. Who voted against it? Only the Middle Eastern peoples, but they were outvoted. Well, they said, we don't care about vote, the land is ours, period. And they engaged in wars. They engaged in 4 wars which they could not win. So then they resorted to terrorist tactics. Now, why did the Arabs lose? One of the big reasons the Arabs lost, folk, is the Arabs were getting their weaponry from the Soviet Union and later from Russia. All right, everybody listening, you'll see this again. The Arabs got their weaponry from the Soviet Union, later from Russia. The Israelis got their weaponry from, anybody know?
No.
The United States.
The Arabs?
The Arabs got their weaponry from Russia.
Oh.
With Soviet, yes, it was once called the Soviet Union, now it's called Russia. They got their weaponry from Russia. The Israelis got their weaponry from the United States. And the American weaponry was much, much, much better than the weaponry the Arabs were using. Now, I had a man at Lockheed ask me one time, what benefit did the United States get from helping Israel? When you ask a question like this for the first time, I was taken aback by it. Went home, got to think about it. What benefit did the United States gain from helping Israel? Here's our benefit, folk. The benefit is we gain peace during our lifetimes, at least relative peace. When the Arabs used Russian weaponry and the Israelis used American weaponry, and the Israelis, who were greatly outnumbered, blew the Arabs off the battlefield, it made the Russians think twice about fighting us. That's where we benefited. The Soviet Union knew all along they could not whip the United States in a war. Now, that does not apply to April 2014. We're now engaging in a war of words with Russia. And if Russia gets China on their side, if Russia gets the Muslim world on their side, and if Russia gets a lot of the former Soviet states on their side, particularly Belarus and Armenia and who all else, they could make a big war for us. And guess what? Britain and France, they're no help. Either they won't fight or they can't help us. It could be the United States fighting against most of Africa, most of the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and China. And I don't think the United States could win. I'm too young to remember the 1948 war, which occurred year before I was born, but in 1956 there was another war. Then in 1967, just as I was graduating from high school, just at the time I was about to graduate, there was another war. And I remember that one pretty well. It was a rout. It's called the Six-Day War sometimes, but it was a war where where the Israelis just, you might say, huffed and blew the Arabs off the battlefield and made the Arabs actually take off your boots and start running pell-mell through the sand. And a lot of them would get down with their faces buried in the sand and beg for mercy. The last war was in 1973, right about the time I had started teaching, called the Yom Kippur War, where the Arabs surprised them. This time, the Arabs had gotten a hold of some American weapons, and they fought the Israelis to a standstill. Now, the press would say time is on the Arab side, but unknown to the rest of the world, technology, the microchip technology came on the scene, The Israeli scientists are much, much better than the Arab scientists. And the Israelis were able to develop weapons, including, we believe, they now have the atomic bomb. They deny that they do, but they have been denying that for years. But we suspect that their scientists have perfected it. And the Arab world, in the meantime, is too busy fighting each other. Now, just about a year ago, Muammar Gaddafi said we're going to destroy the nation of Israel, and within a few months' time, Muammar Gaddafi was dead. The Egyptian President Mubarak said it's time Israel went off the map. Within a few months, Mubarak was deposed and was dead. So much for Libya, so much for Egypt. Syrian President Assad says Israel must go, but Assad has his hands full now fighting his fellow Syrians.